I'd like to welcome all of you to the celebration of the National Lee Bennett Hopkins Award for Children's Poetry. My name is Carla Schmidt. I am the director of the Pennsylvania Center for the Book. I can't forget to do part of my job here. How fortunate are children and all poetry aficionados everywhere that 31 years ago, Stephen Herb, founding director of the Pennsylvania Center for the Book at Penn State, responded with a resounding yes when Lee Hopkins approached him about starting a children's poetry award. Yes, that is absolutely right. We are celebrating tonight the 30th winner of the Hopkins Poetry Award for Children. Isn't that amazing? We are sad that both Lee and Stephen have passed away, but their legacy continues with this event tonight. It has always seemed fitting to me that they shared April 13th as their day of birth, a month in which we have traditionally celebrated poetry for folks of all ages. This is my 15th year administering the award. It's my last hurrah, so to speak, doing that since I'm retiring in 4 short months. And so I'd like to share a few notable facts about this award. We have had jurors from 40 of the 50 United States. Ashley Bryan was the first winner in 1993 with his title, Sing to the Sun. Nikki Grimes is the 31st winner with Garvey in the Dark. And that celebration will be in the fall of 2023, most likely. The winningest poet has been Helen Frost with 1 win and 3 honor books. I joked with her one time that I should put her on speed dial. I could go on and on and on with facts about this award and funny and poignant stories, but instead I'll encourage each and every one of you to check out the many diverse winning titles through the years on the Pennsylvania Center for the Book website. Just Google it. I need to thank the Pennsylvania Center for the Book team. Takes a village. Some of the team, why don't you stand up so people can see who works at the Pennsylvania Center for the Book? Especially Caroline Wermuth, who isn't loving probably that I'm saying this right now, but she is our outreach coordinator who organizes getting the book submissions, planning the event, the schedule, and is extraordinary with the details of an event like this and all of the moving parts, including what kinds of chairs we should have at the front of the room. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Faye Chadwell. Can you see her over there in the middle? Dean of the University Libraries and Scholarly Communications, along with her administrative team, for continued support of not only this award, but of the Pennsylvania Center for the Book. And now I'll invite Lynn Rutan from Michigan, who is the chair of this year's committee that selected the 2022 titles, to present the awards.
Good evening and welcome. My name is Lynn Rutan, and it was my privilege to serve as the chairman of the Lee Bennett Hopkins Poetry Award for Children. I was joined in that event by 4 hardworking and very dedicated jurors, and they are Kathleen Kuo, program manager for Nevada Humanities, Corey Erickson, who was a library coordinator from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. John Miklos, author and poet, and John is with us tonight. So John, would you stand and also Dr. Jason Griffin, who is a professor of children's literature here at Penn State University. And Jason, will you stand too, please? Thank you. It's truly wonderful to actually see the people that you have talked with on Zoom and by email for months and months. So it's wonderful that you could be here. So we chose as a committee our two books tonight. We chose one honor book, The One Thing You'd Save by Linda Sue Park. I have to get us going here. By Linda Sue Park, published by Clarion Books. A wonderful story, a verse novel done in Shijo Korean poetry, in which another classroom assignment has children discussing and defending an essay that they write about the one item that they would save in a fire. During the course of this assignment, the children grow to understand each other and themselves. Our second book, of course, is our winner, and that is Born on the Water, the 1619 Project by Nikole Hannah-Jones and Renée Watson. It was published by Kokila, an imprint of Penguin Random. One of the things that guided us most throughout, I am falling down on the job here. This is our wonderful author. There's too many things for me to concentrate on up here, all this technology. Here's our winning book and our wonderful cover. One of the things that we considered most as a jury while we worked through the months was the charge to our committee. It guided everything that we did, what we thought about, and how we chose our book. It is for the most outstanding anthology. Whoops, here I go again. I'm very sorry. These are our authors. Well, all right. The charge of our story, the charge of our committee was to select the most outstanding anthology or single volume of poetry for children by a living author and published in the year previous. We were also guided by help that the book should be accessible to children, and its presentation must serve the poem or poems in a way that is attractive and appropriate for the audience. It was an extraordinary experience for us as a jury to serve and to spend several months really immersed in the wealth that is children's poetry today. It comes in a wonderful variety of formats these days. And so we read board books for toddlers, massive anthologies. We read picture books. We read verse novels for teens and verse novels for young children. We also read informational books, all done in poetry. It was an amazing experience. We read and we reread. We thought, we discussed, and I think we also dreamed in poetry for a while. I think it was a very good thing that Carla and Carolyn set a time limit for our deliberations, because I think we might be discussing still if it weren't for that. I'm sure all of you tonight are aware of the books and have read them. The two that clearly came to the surface for us, and we are so happy to be able to celebrate them. I'd like to quickly review some of the book, do a quick summary of it, read a little tiny bit of the poetry, and also share some of the comments by the jury. Born on the Water, with lyrical verses by Nikole Hannah-Jones and Renée Watson, and striking illustrations by Nikkolas Smith. This powerful picture book from the 1619 Project provides a pathway for young children to reflect on the origins of American history by chronicling the events of American slavery and Black resistance in the United States. The book is framed by a wonderful coda, which is also a school assignment. I think we had a theme going there. The child goes at school and is told that she needs to do a project about her ancestors. My teacher gave us an assignment. Who are you? She asks. Trace your roots. Draw a flag that represents your ancestry. And the little girl she's completely unsure. I tell her, I do not know where I begin. I do not know my story. And so by the end of the class, she goes home feeling deeply ashamed. She has a blank paper. She does not know what to do. She feels like she has failed. When she arrives home, her grandmother hears her, gathers the family together, and says, "Come and let me tell you our beginning. I will tell you where we're from." There are several beautiful pages reflecting the history of the joy and the light and the connection that the people had with their land. They say our people were born on the water, but our people had a home, a place, a land before they were stolen. The poetry is dynamic and powered by a strong rhythm. And then the palette of the story, after many pages of this beautiful land, changes abruptly when the slavers arrived on the ship, the White Lion. The palette of the words and the illustrations change, reflecting beautifully for children in images and carefully chosen words the horror of the event. At the same time, doing so in an appropriate way. When the White Lion eventually lands in the New World after the horrific journey, they land at Point Comfort, Virginia. 400 years ago, in the year 1619, the white people called this land Virginia, a sweet sounding word for a place of such pain, a sweet sounding word for the place where American slavery began. And from here, soon there is a child, a Black child born into slavery, the first Black child born in the United States. And generations follow of people suffering and living in poverty and living in slavery, and yet always resisting. And the people who were born on the water survived by living and by living. And here our story lightens and we have begin to see hope that surfaces, because now the story, speaking of the heroes and the everyday people who fought and achieved despite enormous obstacles. And these people who were able to pull their people out of poverty and into and slavery and into the democracy that was promised in this new world. And because the people survived and because the people fought, America began to live up to its promise. And I, again, have failed dismally to move through these beautiful illustrations. These are some of the beautiful pages that reflect the land that the people come from. And here you can see the shift in palette as we move to the slavers kidnapping them. And here, Point Comfort, where they arrived a full year ahead of the Pilgrims who landed in 1620. And now we come full circle. And I think I may love this illustration the most. I love the smile on that child's face because now she knows her story. Now she is filled with the pride of all of these accomplishments. And she says, "And I am not ashamed. I know what my story is. I know where I am from, where I begin." This beautiful, beautiful book. It's powerful, it's moving, and clearly our jury felt that it was the strongest and best poetry book for children in our year of 2021, 22 of our award. I'd like to share a few of our jurors' comments because they were wonderfully astute and really wrote some wonderful things about the book. There's a powerful, clearly, the series of poems connect seamlessly to create an extensive historical narrative, while each individual poem can also stand powerfully on its own. The verses are lyrically written with a skillful use of action words that create a dynamic kinetic rhythm. There's a wonderful use of images as well that are extraordinarily evocative and perfectly attuned to a young audience. The poems combine to provide an outstanding historical record, condensing effectively many, many years of events. Well-chosen examples in the poems provide the framework that allow a young audience to make wider connections. And this American origin story is filled with joy, despair, and then hope. And it explains the topic of where did I come from through a student's class assignment. Readers will feel raw emotions through the poetry. And I'd like to thank both these two wonderful authors for being brave enough to speak the truth to children about this important piece of history, and to do so with such remarkable poetry. Hooray. Now we get to the fun part of the evening, where we'll have an interview with our two award-winning authors. And I'd like to present, first of all, joining us by Zoom is Nikole Hannah-Jones, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. She is the recipient of a MacArthur Fellowship, a Peabody Award, and many other awards. And here with us tonight is Renée Watson. Renée is a best-selling author. Her books have enormous waiting lists on my school, at my school library, and she has received a Newbery Honor and a Coretta Scott King Award. All right, joining us tonight, Carla.
I don't know if she can see me.
I can see you. I can see you both. Hey,
Wonderful.
Renée.
It's hard to know where the camera is. So congratulations on the Hopkins Award to both of you. We have had a duo author honor-winning title in the past, but you two have the distinction of being the first two author winners of one book. So you're part of my whole Hopkins trivia going forward. Yes, I want to start with you and Renée, because you had mentioned Lee, that you actually had a little bit of interaction with Lee, and I thought it would be nice for everyone to hear about that. Sure. And Nikole, I don't know if you actually ever met him or not. No, so maybe we'll start with that. Just you can share that a little bit.
Sure. Well, hello, everyone. Good evening. Hi, Nikole. It's good to see you. So I live in Harlem, and when I first moved to Harlem, I was, exploring and getting to know my neighborhood, and realized that the brownstone that Langston Hughes lived in for the last 20 years of his life was blocks away from me. And at the time, it was closed, and I was just like, what do you mean it's closed? It's not a museum. It's not a space where the public can come into. And so I contacted the owner. A group of writers gathered around me and supported me in this endeavor. And we started a nonprofit to host events in that space, mostly for young people, but also for the larger writing community. And so for 4 years, we had poetry workshops and readings and conversations and all kinds of events in the home of Langston Hughes in Harlem. And Lee found out about what we were doing in Harlem and reached out to me. I did not know him. I mean, I knew of him, of course, but he was so generous. He donated and would just email me every now and then and give some love and just say, thinking of you, I'm cheering you on, you got this, so proud of you, congratulations. And so this award means a lot to me because it is in his name, and it's of a person who I know loved not just poetry, but Langston also, and loved young people, and was really living out what he talked about, not just talking. So I feel very honored to get this award in his name.
Mm-hmm. Lee always talked about Langston Hughes as being a huge influence on his own work. Mm-hmm. So I loved that when you had that story to tell us. I'm curious, and I think probably other folks are curious too, about how you came, the two of you, how you got together and decided to make this origin story accessible to children, and how, just how that whole process came together, and how, I don't know, who did what, I guess, so to speak, as far as the writing and deciding what would go where, and how it related to, Nikole, to your essays, the original essays that you wrote.
Sure. Thank you so much. And glad that Renee is there in person. We ran into each other at the airport yesterday and gave each other a big hug. She was on the way to come there. So I wish I could be in person with you all, but I'm really grateful for this honor, especially as a journalist, a nonfiction writer, to receive an honor in poetry. I used to write poetry when I was younger and really stopped doing poetry once I became a journalist. So it's kind of an amazing moment for me. So when we decided to turn the 1619 project into a book, I knew immediately that it needed to also come with a children's book. And that really came from being out on the road and hearing from so many parents and educators who were saying, we love the 1619 project, but we don't want to wait until our children are grown to introduce them to the story and to the arguments that are made, and particularly about the role Black Americans have played in shaping our country and our democracy. But I also am a person who knows my limitations, and I'm not a children's book author. I've never written a children's book. So I told the publisher that I wanted to co-write it with a children's book author, but actually co-write it, not have a children's book author kind of ghost write the book, but to do it together. And our publisher suggested Renee as someone that she thought would be a great match for this. And I read everything that she wrote, and we met, and we just really hit it off immediately. There was just a connection, and I think a natural relationship and respect for the work we were trying to do. And so we both wrote it. It was Renee's idea to do this in the form of poetry. And I think that's why she's the brilliant children's book writer, because she understood the right vessel for such heavy material and material that was trying to span so much history in a children's book. And so each short poem in the book, we both wrote. So either she would write the beginning and I would come in and write the end, or I would write the beginning and she would write the end. And sometimes we joke because there's some passages I know I wrote and I know she wrote, and there's others that we can no longer even remember who wrote it.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, I love that we really collaborated and worked together. And I so respect Nikole for letting this poet push her to write poetry. And I think at one point we had to start calling it vignettes just to kind of ease the pressure of like, who's a poet and who's not, who gets to own that word. But I have always loved Nicole's writing, and her writing is very poetic. And the articles that, and even listening to the podcast, just she has this cadence and a way of talking to folks that is very accessible, and poetry felt like the way to go for this book, because of what we were talking about, and also because we were talking to young people. And I wanted us to think about snapshots through history and maybe bite-sized pieces that an educator could take out and maybe just read one or two at a time, and then you could go to the rest. Just thinking of pacing and the tradition of passing down oral histories in Black culture and spoken word poetry and the way that we tell our stories. It felt right to do this in poetry. So I was so thrilled that she said yes to that format. And yeah, I love that we cannot tell anymore in some of the poems who wrote which part. And then we wrote this during the pandemic. And I mean during the quarantine, shut down, not seeing each other. So it was already hard to write a book about the history of slavery in America for children in a picture book through poetry, through Google Docs and Zoom meetings. So yeah, it was a wild experience, and but I'm very grateful that we had that time together to create.
It sounds like you've become good friends through the process.
Yes,
that's
Renee,
wonderful.
she's wonderful, as you can see.
I thought that the beginning of the story was so authentic, with the young girl having this school assignment of tracing her roots. And I think that all children can relate to having assignments similar to that. When she goes home and asks Grandma about the story, I liked the part where Grandma starts the story by saying that our people had home, a place, a land before they were sold. And that just kind of, oh dear, hits you, really hits you. To have that, it just started out so joyful, and the illustrations are so incredibly beautiful of the people. You see people with happy faces. It's a joyous community. The pictures, there's blue skies, and you really kind of learn about how important family was to the folks before they were taken. And I like the way it started that way, with the assignment being so relevant, I guess, and really realistic to what children experience in school. But then the realization that probably many children have this experience of not knowing exactly who their ancestors are. And then to have a book like this be able to help with that understanding and that story.
Yeah, Nikole, do you want to speak to that choice to do the assignment?
Yes. So, that assignment or the way we started is based on how I end the democracy in the adult book was, I was that child who got that assignment and didn't quite know what to do with it. And then, 40 years later, I had my own child in elementary school, and she received the same assignment, and came home not sure what to do with it. So there was really this understanding that this is for Black American children, a very universal experience and a assignment that educators give with the best of intent. They're giving this to talk about the great melting pot of America, but often not taking into consideration the way that slavery really erased that connection to a particular native land or people. But Renee and I, when we were talking about kind of what the shape of the book would be like, we both thought it was really important to spend a lot of time, about a third of the book, in Africa, and making sure, because we don't learn much about what the lives of people were before they began in slavery. Also serves to dehumanize, right? That we wanted to show you everything that they had, that they were like any other group of humans. They had family, they had love, they created, they had businesses, they did everything that everyone else did. And that it's only in understanding all that they had that you can really, to me, grasp all that was lost and all that was taken away. And Renee, I know you I'm sure want to speak to that, because that was something we really did discuss, was ensuring that we built that in at the beginning.
That was the first. So there were two things we talked about in that first meeting, and it was, can it be written in verse? And we both were like, we want to start in joy. We were very adamant. Not that we had to necessarily convince our editor, but we just wanted to make it very clear that we wanted to start with the people's humanity and who they were before what happened to them, and that they were not what happened to them. And so because of Nikole's great research and all this material she gave me, I was also learning as I was writing the book about, well, what were their lifestyles like, and what were the games they played, and the instruments. Nikkolas did a lot of research to make sure that these illustrations are authentic and represent the trueness of the enslaved people before they were stolen. So yeah, we really wanted to start with joy, and I'm very proud that so much of the first half of the book is just us learning about these people and their lives and how much they loved each other and how brilliant they were. I think one thing Nikole and I have talked about a lot too is that in the telling of slavery in America, it's also implied, if not blatantly said, that the people they didn't have skills and they were just lazy, and that's why we could just, use them to work for us. But they actually were taken because they were brilliant and because they knew how to till the land, and they knew how to make a way out of no way. They were taken because of their skill, not because of their lack of skills. And so emphasizing that in the book was important to us too.
Yeah, I loved this page that said the people were good with their hands,
Yeah.
good at math and science. They used shells for money, counting, recording, trading. They knew what their work was worth.
Yeah.
And the language and the words that they use for joy, for grow, for home, the hands had a knowing, and all of that. I just love the way it sounds when you say it, and just the poetry of it is absolutely beautiful.
Thank you.
And it gives, yes, and you have knowledge of the origin of the people, and it is just beautifully done. I'm curious about, the illustrations really go from that lightness to the darkness, and one of the pages that the first time, it goes from the happy, the people are dancing and enjoying the people within their community. And then that ship comes and it gets quite a bit darker. When I do story time with children, they're usually right in front of me. I can go like this with the book and they can see the pictures. So you're going to have to look at the book more closely later. But I think you can see the darkness even from this distance. And then when you go to the very middle of the book, there's a double page spread, no words, just the picture of that ship. And I thought it was so haunting, horrible, horrific. I started with those H words and then I went to terrible, traumatic. It just the picture itself gives you this feeling of what happened and how the people were taken from everything that they knew and divided and taken to a land that they had no knowledge of, and the language different and what the expectations were. And I thought Nikkolas Smith did a really incredible job with depicting that emotion. And I'm wondering, how did you connect with him, with Nikkolas?
So we were given a few artists to look through, and he was our first choice. We both unanimously were like, yes, Nikkolas, I believe in. And so he said yes once he was invited into the collaboration. And yeah, I'm amazed at what he did. And as a writer who writes picture books, I'm always thinking of what can I leave out so that the illustrator can have space to do with images what might be too traumatic to say in words. So I think it was an intentional partnership and we asked him, there was a note when we were writing that we kind of put in parentheses and said, can we just have a spread with the ship where there's just silence? So yes, he's brilliant and amazing. And if you all are not familiar with his work, please get familiar with his work. He is an artivist. He uses his art for activism. Yeah, he does incredible work. And I think Nikole was going to say something. I cut her off.
No.
Okay.
Well, I was just thinking that it isn't often that authors or poets get the opportunity to make suggestions about what the art should look like. And so actually that ship with no words came from the two of you, which you wouldn't know. And those are things that are really interesting to share with children sometimes about how those pages came to be. The other thing, I know that you've done quite a bit of speaking with children and young adults and adults. And I'm curious what kind of response you've gotten from the children. In particular.
I'm looking at you. I don't know where to look. If
I know it's
me.
kind of. I know. We're cranking our necks.
Well, I'll let you answer first.
And it's been a really amazing response. Unfortunately, we are in a time in this country where we have to say this aloud, which is that our children are capable of handling the truth. It is important for our children to learn not just about the things that, but the ways our nation has stumbled and has struggled to live up to its ideals. And can, I don't have to tell anyone who works with children this, they can grapple with really difficult ideas. They have a very strong sense of what's right and wrong. And I have found, I did an event ago with a elementary school in Philadelphia, and in every classroom, it was virtual, in every classroom, a student got to ask a question. And I was just absolutely amazed by the sophistication of their questions and the way they were trying to understand how our society allowed this, but also really connecting with the humanity of the characters. And I remember, Renee, when we went to that school in Harlem, one of the few truly racially diverse schools in the city. And I met this Asian American girl, we both did, in a classroom. And she talked about, there's a line that was really important to me in the book, which we repeat, which is that ours is no immigration story. Really trying to help kids understand that yes, we are a nation of immigrants, but not all of us chose to be here. And that it's a very different experience when you had to lose all the connections to your homeland, that there will be no, writing letters back home or giving your loved one a hug or being reunited in America. And the little girl said, and she's in a classroom with children who are descendants of American slavery, that she never understood that. She never thought about that, and that she felt more empathy and understanding for her classmates, because this wasn't something she had ever been taught. And I think that's really the point of the book. That's the point of literature, is to help us to connect to our fellow human beings in ways that we wouldn't, to have tolerance and empathy and understanding. So for me, it's been really amazing. Our children are not afraid of this knowledge. It's the adults who are afraid, and our children should have ability to learn and grapple with these hard truths.
I remember that visit so vividly. I remember the young girl you're talking about. And at one point she said, I just think that would be really hard to
Yes.
go through that. Like, she was really thinking and empathizing, and she was not devastated. And she also didn't have pity. She just
That's
actually
right.
was like, wow, this happened. And these people survived, and the legacy is their strength. Like, she was able to, these are, what were they, fourth and fifth graders, I think.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it was just so beautiful and profound to see the wheels kind of turning in her mind. And so many, we have so many stories, countless stories of young people who are moved by the story. And then one of the beautiful things that kept happening, especially when the book first came out, was that we would get tagged on social media with girls who were doing their hair like the main character in the book. There are so many of these photos online that were getting sent to us. So just representation. We always say, it matters. It's kind of a cliche at this point to say that, but then you get these photos of little girls seeing themselves sometimes for the first time on a cover or in a book, and it's their full story. So it's been a beautiful experience engaging with young people and with educators. And young people are making art too. They're writing poems and responding through visual art. We have a teacher's guide, for those of you who don't know, that you can download from the 1619 Project website. My website has it. And it's actually more than a guide. It's like a full-blown curriculum. Like, it is
Yeah.
writing prompts for different age groups, uh, extra reading materials for support. So yeah, we really wanted this to not just be a moment, but that you could really do a unit and really think about how to incorporate this in the curriculum or even in your home with young people.
I was hoping you would mention that teaching guide.
Add something. Could I add something real quick about that? The other, I think, surprising thing has been the number of adults who have also loved the book, whether they have children, and that this origin story, giving Black Americans of any age an origin story that says our story does not begin with slavery, that we have been actors and agents in the American story, has really had a very emotional effect even on adults, because so many of us grow up with that sense of emptiness or inadequacy, and not, of having been that child who didn't have a flag or an origin. And so that's been a beautiful thing to see. That's the beauty of poetry, I think, is you might be writing it to one audience, but it is something that can be experienced by all ages and enjoyed by all ages. And 1619education.org is where folks can find an entire curriculum, and also teachers sharing lesson plans and all types of different ways that they're using the project. My favorite thing is teachers share. They make tours of the cover and different art. It's something that's getting in.
The story is very universal, and I feel like some of us, maybe when we were growing up, the history books that we learned from didn't tell this story at all. And so I can see where putting this knowledge out is so important, not only for young people, but for adults as well. Yeah. So we're grateful that we're grateful to have this title and to have the original material as well, Nikole, that you wrote. Wasn't it did you print those essays in a newspaper? Was that it?
Yeah, it originally came out as a special of the New York Times Magazine, and then now it's in a adult book, and we also have a 6-part documentary series on Hulu right now.
Fantastic.
Oh,
and
wonderful.
a podcast. There's all
And a
kinds of ways
podcast.
to enter in. So I encourage y'all to dig in.
Lots of resources available to everyone, which is wonderful. The story goes on to talk about resisting in big and small ways. And I like that the story comes around sort of from this kind of haunting, horrible sadness to this idea of resisting and then survival and the continuing legacy of folks. And the last pages actually have pictures of, I was looking at them again to see if I could determine who the actual people were on these pages. They depict real people. Isn't that correct? Yes, that's what I thought. And so there's so much to look at with every viewing of this book. There's so much more to find every time you look at it. Sometimes I'm discovering secrets that I hadn't seen before. In fact, in reading what Nikkolas had said about the book, he said that there are parts that are hidden in the pictures. And so I've been looking, trying to find the hidden parts. Usually I feel like when I share material or a book with children, they quickly find those parts, more so than us adults sometimes. But I don't know, that might be kind of a fun thing to do with the book as well, is to look for those. And emblems and symbols, I think, are included, African emblems and symbols. And it sounded like he took material from more than one area of Africa. Is that correct? That he tried to depict more than one area within the country, which is wonderful too. So, it's just rich with research topics as well for children. Yeah, I have to mention that as a librarian.
That spread that you have open, is that legacy?
Yes, this is the legacy
this
page.
Is one of my favorite spreads of the book. Having that moment, even just as the writer, as a Black woman, to be able to talk about the legacy and the strength and the dignity and the pride and all of what we come from, and that we're more than just what happened to us. But what I love about this is that you have Frederick Douglass and Billie Holiday next to a Black Lives Matter protester, next to the ancestor that's on the front of the book. And so this idea, especially with young people, to encourage them to think about changing their world just as they are, that they don't necessarily have to think of activism as this big, I have to go make a speech, I have to march. You can do that. You can also be a teacher and be an activist in the classroom. You can, we were listing all types of ways to show up in the world as your best self. And that it's not about always doing these big moments that sometimes get the shine and get the clout, but that if you love math, if you love to sing, if you love to dance, that is your contribution to this world, and you have inherited that as well. So I love that spread for that reason. I think a lot of young people identify, they name the people that they recognize, but they're also seeing that they can be one of those people as well.
Many times when I've looked at this book so many times, but it makes me think of the PBS program with Henry Louis Gates.
Oh, wow.
I know. I don't know if you know him, but with the Finding
Yeah.
Your Roots
Yeah.
series, because whenever they're doing the tracing of the history of a Black American, many times those histories have been lost, and it's hard to find. The documentation isn't there, and so they have to find other ways of discovering the genetic history or even who the ancestors of the folks are. And I just feel like this is such a great, maybe this book should come first or be a companion book or somehow be highlighted on that show. I love when we can bring media into print, that
Yeah.
there are ways that we can do that. So
I just want to
Sure. Go ahead.
mention some of the secrets that Nikkolas
Oh, yes.
incorporated. So in the poem Tobacco Fields, you won't be able to see it this far away, but I'm just going to show you. We have a person who is looking, literally praying into the future for folks he knows they're coming, and he might not get freedom, but he's praying for the ones who are coming after him. And as he's planting these seeds and tilling the ground, in the sky, we see Michael Brown, a protester, and we see the clouds spell out BLM, which is Black Lives Matter. But you really don't notice that when you first look. I looked at this several times before I was like, wait a minute. And so I was like, I think I sent a text message to Nikkolas, and I was like, this
Yeah.
is what I think is that. So yes, all through this book, there are hidden gems like that that I love that he did. And I'm sure our young people catch them right away, much quicker than I did.
They often do. I know that you've both experienced many highlights in your careers as writers. You've had awards and achievements that you've been recognized for. And I realize that winning awards and those achievements require some additional energy sometimes and time commitments. So I'm just curious how you balance your writing life and your time with family and friends with any honors that you get and speaking engagements like this that require some time travel or taking an evening away from maybe your writing or taking some time for yourself. What is
Nikole?
that? How do you do that? How do you balance all of that?
You can go. I feel like I've talked a lot.
No, I mean, you're there. I think it's more interesting for you to talk than me to talk on the screen. I think we all struggle with balance, and yeah, to me, it's just day to day. Some days more balance, many days are not. I have a 12-year-old waiting for me to get off of the Zoom and cook dinner. So yeah, I try to squeeze in writing where I can and full dedicated days of writing where I can, but I really feel, tremendously blessed. I get to read books, they interview people and write for a living. And I can do it anywhere and I can do it almost any time. So, who knows? Right. I'm a woman in America. What is that?
Well, I will say, Nikole also can throw a really good party. We definitely have downtime. I think maybe because I will speak for myself. Most of the time when I'm posting on social media, it is when I'm doing events, and when I'm not, you don't really hear from me. And I think the illusion can sometimes be that I am very busy, but I do take breaks and I do have fun, and I take moments where I'm just with my family. I just went to see New Edition in concert, and I'm a 90s R&B 90s girl, so I sang every song and I was loud. There are moments where I get to sneak it in here and there, but I definitely am trying to be better at marking these moments with folks who care about me and love me and who have been a part of my journey. So my niece is someone that I often bring with me to events, or I have my sister travel with me just to keep me grounded, but also to share in meeting amazing people and getting to travel the world and do all of these great things. Like Nikole said, it is a blessing. I know that it comes with a price, but it is a good challenge to have, to be so tired because you get to do this work. So I'm learning how to balance it all, but I'm having fun too.
That's wonderful. It's great to hear. I want to thank both of you for coming to visit with all of us today and sharing your thoughts about the 1619 project and how it all came to be. And I'm optimistic that this book is going to be in print in 250 years in whatever version that we have in that amount of time. Who knows how we're going to be reading? I have no idea. But I know that it's going to be there, and it's a story that will never be lost, ever. And it won't be forgotten. And the hopefulness exhibited in that story, I hope that it's continually fully realized because it's important, so important for all of us and all of our histories. I wanted to make sure to leave a little time for questions from the audience. I had lots more on my paper, but I bet the audience has some questions that I haven't even thought to ask. And Caroline has a microphone. I am going to ask that if you do have a question to please use the microphone. Even though you might feel you have a loud voice, if you're hard of hearing like I am, it just needs to be amplified. So thank you for using that microphone. And say who you are.
Okay. So,
Okay.
hi, I'm Bob Tara. I work here in the libraries as their development officer, but also I'm a graduate of the comparative literature program. And when I was in that program, we studied orality. And one of the books we read was Zong. That book of poetry about a slave ship that was intentionally sunk because of the property in order to get the insurance, right? And it was trying to capture those voices. I see the cover, the title of the book, I see the cover, I see that middle spread with that ship and that darkness. And I have to ask, like, is this book somewhat in dialogue with that other poem that is, darker? Because it feels like there's a relationship there.
Well, I think the book is probably in conversation with a lot of other books that have been written about slavery that have tried to grapple with those emotions. The title "Born on the Water" came from something that Nikole says when she's introducing her essay, and I also heard it. So I read her, but when I listened to the podcast, she begins the first episode with, "They say our people were born on the water." And this idea that people from different places started a new language and a new way of living and a new way of being by having to be trapped on that ship on the water, and that was kind of this new birth and this new existence. So that is where I just thought that was so poetic, and we were going back and forth about titles. And I think, yeah, we both settled on that. But we just took that. Well, I was moved to take it right from the essay that Nikole wrote. Do you want to add anything about the title or what it's in conversation to?
Yeah, so I'm not familiar with that book, so I can't say that it's directly in conversation, but I feel like, as Renee said, all of this work is in conversation with other texts and with oral histories, and so I'm gonna order it now and read it.
Hi, Nikole and Renee. I just want to thank you for the brilliant book. My name's Jason Griffith. I'm a professor of children's literature here at Penn State, and I was one of the jury members. And I also got to participate in one of the cohorts of the educator pilot for the book as well. So I've gotten a chance to hear you speak about this a little bit. And this has become a staple of my children's lit courses for pre-service teachers. And as I'm sure you all are acutely aware, maybe way more than anyone, it's a tough time right now for authors, for educators, for librarians. And I'm just thinking a lot about this sort of notion of gatekeeping of text and academic gatekeeping. And I just did a read aloud with my pre-service teachers today, just kind of in honor of this event. And one of the things that in the same way that you gave credit to children, like pre-service teachers know this too. Like when they encounter the book, there's not really any controversy. Like when we talk about how, like Nikole, I've heard you say it before about how this idea of a new origin story, it's not meant to supplant any other origin story. It's supposed to fill a gap. It's additive, not it's not supposed to be a replacement or anything like that. And just how much I learned from your scholarship. Like Renee, you mentioned Nikkolas's research in terms of his artwork, and I've heard him talk about his end papers. And I mean, just knowing that we know the name William Tucker and the Tuckers of Tidewater, and the name the White Lion, and just thinking of how many historical names in the other origin stories are common practice. But the craft and research, like that's as you all know as well, being nonfiction writers, that's not always the case with children's literature. There's some historical, quote unquote, historical books that aren't anywhere near the level of truth. So I guess the question with that is just around this notion of the sort of misuse and gosh, I don't know what the right verb is. The way that the term indoctrination is misused, and how this notion of, like, I even showed a definition of indoctrination to my pre-service students, which is encountering some sort of notion uncritically. And I mean, what could be closer to that than banning a book and not even allowing students to read and engage in the conversation? So for better or worse, I mean, teachers and librarians are kind of on the front lines of this battle as well. So I guess the question is, what thoughts do you have in terms of how educators can kind of can take up this battle, can serve effectively to broker this book for children, get it in the hands of kids who can benefit from it, and just any other thoughts about that general debate.
Renee, do you want to start?
Sure. So I think we just got to stop being afraid of white people being uncomfortable, right? Because that's real. A lot of it is the fear of making white students uncomfortable. And I actually think to say to a classroom that has white students in it, and also, it is not as if people of color are comfortable with this, like as if we just want to talk about this all the time, or that it doesn't hurt or bring up emotions for Black students who are in the classroom as well. That said, I actually think saying to a young person, the fact that you're uncomfortable or that you're feeling something is a good sign. I would hope that teaching this book would make people uncomfortable and get students feeling emotions, because we should look back on our history and think, oh, I can't believe we did that as a country. And how do we not do it again? And how can we be better? That's what we want our young people to be grappling with and wrestling with. So there's that part. As far as what teachers can do, and what so many of you are already doing, I think there's a long range. I'm not asking any of y'all to get fired from your jobs, right? So what is going to be pushing back in a way that makes sense for you and what you can do right now. So I've seen everything from read-ins. I've seen students do walkouts where they just sit in the hallway and they read the banned books. I've seen teachers, implement it in their curriculum. I've also seen teachers who could not teach the book, but they can give out what Miss Renee is reading. And they've listed some of the books that are banned. And that is the thing that the student takes home and can check it out of their public library. So there's a range of things that teachers can do to be super verbal and visible, and also maybe more quiet, but also getting it in there. And I think you have to decide how you want to navigate those waters. But I actually feel like, though all of the opposition is very, very real on so many of our books, I have met so many activist educators who are doing great things, and they just don't have the mic. So that everyone else is a lot louder than they are, but I am seeing a lot of movements happening, and I'm encouraged by the fact that teachers are on the front lines and are trying to do something about it.
Yeah, I don't have much to add to that, except we know that exposing children to a wide variety of texts told from a wide variety of viewpoints is the opposite of indoctrination. Indoctrination is getting a very narrow pre-selected education. And I think that the role of education is to challenge us, to expand us, to teach us about things and people and points of view that we wouldn't ordinarily have. And again, these conversations that we're having are not coming from children who are saying, oh my God, I learned about this in school and I felt so terrible. And even if they were, this is the chance for parents and educators to have conversations, right? As Renee said, we should feel uncomfortable. When I read, Eli Wiesel's Night in school, I was deeply discomforted every single day. And that's how I gained empathy for that experience. And that's how we learn not to be a society that accepts those things. So I just think we have to be honest about what it is that we're seeing, right? This is a political propaganda campaign. These are not about parents or people who are actually really afraid of what children are learning in schools. It's parents who, or many of them are not even parents, right? It's people who see this as a political wedge issue. And unfortunately, our children are being caught up in the middle of that, and so many educators and librarians. And what's been astounding to me is, public librarians, not even school librarians, are getting caught up in this hysteria. But I have also just been so heartened by the courage of people in classrooms and of school librarians to push back, even if that may bring some heat on them, to teach the truth. And parents and community members, we have to have the backs of educators and librarians when they stand up to these efforts to ban, because that, I think, is the biggest problem. Is teachers and librarians want to have the courage, but if they go out on a limb and the only people showing up at that school board meeting are those who are trying to get books banned and get them in trouble, why would they keep doing that? So I think it's up to all of us to stand up for our children's right to learn. That how can we have a great society if we are really, attempting to indoctrinate children into one version of the world and one worldview?
I also want to add, it's always been fascinating to me that so the history is it's not taught well in our country, right? Including white allyship, and that
Yeah.
there were pastors and volunteers and all kind of folks that were white, that were freedom writers, and that were marching alongside Dr. King and all. It is interesting that we don't want to teach our history. We're also not teaching that part about white folks who were activists and who fought for equal rights and equity in our country. And so I think it's just interesting that who folks identify with when we talk about history and slavery and racism, that the first thing is, oh, I don't want my young people learning that because I don't want you telling them that they're horrible. But also, if we're teaching a full history, we're also teaching that there were white people who stood up for what was right. And that needs to be taught too. I think all of our young people need the full story of our country's history. And so, yeah, I think the context also matters. So we're not just trying to teach this one lens of history. We want to step back and see the broader history so that everyone can feel that they have a part and a choice to make on what side you are going to be on, as far as living up to what this country has promised us.
Yes.
Oh, I think we have room for maybe one more question. And while Caroline is walking over there, I just want to say how eloquently you both speak. You have a wonderful way with words and language. It's just lovely to listen to you.
Hi,
Thank
my
you.
name's Kate Vera. I'm an early ed major here at Penn State. I'm actually one of Dr. Jason's students. Hey, how you doing?
Love
Um,
it.
You get your
and
extra credit
thank
for the
you.
class.
Right, I know, extra credit, extra credit.
I would like to say thank you for talking to us. This has been really enlightening. But I was wondering where we could find the teacher guide that goes along with the book.
Yes, you can.
Thank you. Thank you. Never mind.
I don't know what happened. So you got the information?
Yes, she got it. So it's on 1619 project. Is it .com or dot? Is
It's
it
1619education.org.
.org? And then it's also on my website, which is my name, reneewatson.net. So you can download it from there. It's a free downloadable curriculum guide.
Yes.
Oh, there's one more.
One more.
I'll stand up so I can be actually visible. Sorry.
Yeah.
Bear with me. I'm a little tired. My name is Brian. I'm a second-year medical student at the University Park campus here for the PSU College of Medicine. I will be honest, I think it's important to have these types of questions. I am not of the same side as you all, but I think that's safe to admit because, I think we'd all agree that conversations need to be had. But I will say I'm in agreement with you that we should expand the broader scope of understanding history. But to that perspective, I disagree with the idea that, particularly people of Gen Z or even the prior generations, if you exclude the baby boomers, so to speak, that history was taught in sort of a one-sided manner where immigration of Blacks was like the quote unquote notion that a lot of people associate with that era as trying to cover up for slavery. And, because I will be honest, I learned the full scope. Granted, I was in an AP US history class, so maybe that has something to do with it. But we covered everything from triangle trade to understanding how they were treated in the transition over. We talked about all that, including white allyship, as you mentioned just now, with respect to the likes of William Lloyd Garrison and all that. And I could go on, but I'll get to my question. Stop prefacing it. Where do you think there is room for allyship in this modern era? Because I think there is something to be said for a conjoining agreement between, say, conservatives, liberals, if you want to use those terms. Because I personally don't think it lies in the idea of asserting what I would call, bear with me, but I would say vicious ship in a sense, vicious ship in a sense, simply because to an extent, when you examine younger individuals, for example, I mean, to an extent, I do have a knowledge in this. They can only identify in such certain ways up to a certain point of their mental capacity and acuity. And to end here, I'm asking where could we compromise in that sense? Because if we do force ideas like this too early on in the child's age, in a certain age range, it can have ramifications from a psychological perspective because they can only examine the scope to a certain level of brevity. So I'm sorry for that extended question, but bottom line, where could we compromise in the modern era surrounding this type of teaching? And yeah, thank you.
Okay, so there was a lot in that question. Let me just start by saying I'm always deeply skeptical when someone says that they believe that we're on different sides, because I'm not exactly sure what two sides you think we might be on. I think that's a big part of the problem is people don't have to agree politically on all ends, but I would hope that we're not on different sides. And I would imagine you don't actually know what we think about a whole bunch of things. And that's a large part of the political divisiveness. I'd also just like to say, as a Black woman and the mother of a Black child, I don't quite have the luxury of waiting until the proper age to introduce these ideas to my child, because we live in a country where our children get racialized very young, where young children are going into the world and they are getting images and they're getting an understanding of race and how race works. And so we can either provide them with an accurate history and a place to have those conversations, or we can delude ourselves and think that they're not getting those messages and then try to go back and backfill and fix the stereotypes and the notions and their understanding of race later. I just believe that children are capable of having age-appropriate conversations, and that this is the reason why I don't homeschool my child and I send my child to professional educators, because professional educators know the age appropriate way to introduce these conversations, and school librarians know this is a age appropriate text to talk about these things with children, because, you know, honestly, it's impossible for you to say that you got the full scope of it, because I've been studying this history for 40 years and I don't have the full scope of it. I majored in African American studies and I don't have the full scope of it. I learned something new about the role of slavery, of anti-Blackness, of American history every single day. And the research is counter to your belief. The research shows the majority of our children don't know basic facts of slavery. They don't know the 13th Amendment ended slavery. They don't know that Frederick Douglass was born into slavery. They don't know the Civil War was fought over slavery. So maybe you had a better than average experience in AP history, but I know AP history, and I know that slavery is actually a very small part of AP history. So you have an understanding that we are a nation that had slavery. Yes, you do learn the transatlantic slave trade, but we don't learn this history very well. If we learned this history well, you wouldn't see all of these efforts to stop the teaching of the history, because our children would already know it and our society would already know it. So I say all that to say, I do think that there is a lot of area of common ground to be had. Most Americans want the same thing. We want our children to be safe. We want to live in decent housing. We want to be able to live out our ambitions. We want to have certain freedoms. We want a quality education. These are things that we all want, even if we don't always agree with how to get there. I wish we could focus more on that. And my problem with what we're seeing is an effort to not just say, I don't want my child to be exposed to these ideas, but I actually think I have the right to say that all the children in the school can't be exposed to these ideas, or all the children in the school district can be exposed to these ideas. And I just don't think that that is the role of an education. And I don't think that a small number of parents or politicians should be able to prevent entire groups of children of learning things that are very important. And there's a reason why the history that's being targeted just happens to be the history of slavery and racism and Jim Crow. Renee, do you have some thoughts?
I mean, what do I add to that? Amen. Yeah, I just, you know, this book is my contribution to that conversation. Speaking of age appropriateness and wanting to make sure we're not traumatizing young people, that is why we wrote it the way we wrote it. I think that you can learn history and think you know it until you learn more and then you realize what you don't know. I grew up watching Eyes on the Prize and all kind of documentaries, not from school, but from my mama, from home, and still was blown away that in my 20s, I learned the backstory to Rosa Parks, and that she wasn't just tired that day and didn't just in the moment decide not to stand, but that it was planned and organized. And it's the way we talk about things, right? So they didn't just in the moment get inspired to boycott. They planned this thing. And if you teach young people that part of it, that if there was strategy and that people were working together and figuring out how to financially disrupt things in their city, but also financially keep themselves healthy, that is a different way of teaching it, right? So you may have learned about the boycott, but if you're learning it only from this, like, woe is me, this poor lady was so tired, she just couldn't get up out of her seat and decided in the moment she was going to stand up for freedom. That is very different than saying this Black woman sat down on that bus intentionally and refused to give up her seat and had a whole, you know, village of folks behind her who were ready to jump in and carpool and all of that. So I think we know until we really know. And so I would encourage you to be open to knowing more, right?
Yeah.
To adding on to what you've already learned, because we want to be lifelong learners, right? So no matter how old I am, I always want to ask, what else is there to know? And what part has been left out? And who's telling me this? You know, I want to start with the beginning and not just, and then I want to go back and back and back until I'm learning more of the fuller story. So I would encourage you to do that. And Yeah, that's what I would say. I would encourage you to ask more questions and keep digging for our nation's truth.
Yes, just quickly, all of this history happened, whether we learn about it or not.
Yeah.
And so folks who don't want our children to learn about it, that's their problem, because the history happened and the history is shaping our society, and our young people are trying to grapple with a society that they have not been equipped to understand because we have not taught them the truth. This truth is empowering for all of us. You know, to me, there's nothing more inspiring than the story of Black resistance. We were people literally brought here in bondage, who are not intended to be part of the Declaration or the Constitution, but who read those words and fought to make those words true for all Americans. We are some of the greatest patriots this country has ever produced. Who would not want to be inspired by that story unless you can't see yourself in the story of Black Americans? So as Renee said, we can never learn enough. I study history every day. I learn something new every day. And I hope we will all want to have a better understanding of not just the glory of our country, but of the dark chapters as well. And now I'm sure we've gone way over our time, but that was a great
We've gone over a bit, but that's just fine. It's wonderful that we've had this discussion. And I just want to say, when I was a former third grade teacher and taught children who were 9 years old, and we had an author named Ellen Levine come to visit us at our school. And she talked about, if I remember this correctly, a young girl named Claudine Colbert. Not
Colvin.
Colvin,
Claudette
thank
Colvin.
you. Where am I getting
Yes.
Colbert? Probably from
Well,
late night TV. But anyway,
the alliteration.
It's close.
Claudette, I believe.
Claudette Colvin, who she was actually a 14-year-old girl who didn't give up her seat on the bus days and days before Rosa, her planned event.
Yeah.
And those third graders were as intrigued by that story as you can possibly imagine. And
She was a high school student, right? So
yes.
that's the other thing.
Yes.
Like I just met Joanne Bland, who got arrested for the first time in the Birmingham Selma Freedom Struggle at 7 years old. There was the Children's March with Dr. King. Our children find these stories inspiring because they show that even very young people can see a wrong in their society and do something about it. So that's not something that we should fear. That's something that we should encourage.
I agree.
Yeah, right. That's to me, that's the inspiring thing. That is like, you have the power, little one, to do something in this world. That is amazing. And not only do you have the power, but you have all these examples of people who came before you, who loved this country and fought for it. And I think that is a beautiful thing. And it's empowering to say to a young person, you don't have to wait till you're older. You can make change right now in your own little world. You can be a change maker, and look at who else did that.
Yes.
I think on that note, we'll end our discussion. We do have some books for sale, and Renee has agreed to autograph them. And we have little slips of paper that you can write who you would like them to be autographed to. And we'll get set up for all of that. And then you'll get a chance to actually visit with Renee a little bit if you get a book and get your book signed. So thank you so much for coming this evening. It's been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, Nikole.
Bye.